They looked at her skin and saw a servant. They looked at her ticket and saw a mistake. When billionaire CEO Elara Vance was ordered to give up her first-class seat to a privileged stranger because she didn't look the part, she didn't scream, she didn't fight. She simply made one phone call. 5 minutes later, a $940 million merger was dead in the water. The plane was grounded, and the man who insulted her was begging for mercy. This is the story of the most expensive mistake in aviation history. You do not want to miss the ending. The fluorescent lights of JFK's Terminal 4 hummed with the manic energy of a Tuesday morning. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the grey tarmac was slick with rain, reflecting the blinking red lights of the wingtips waiting for takeoff. Inside the exclusive Sapphire Horizon first-class lounge, however, the chaos of the general terminal was muted to a soft, expensive whisper. The air smelled of bergamot and fresh espresso. Crystal tumblers clinked against marble countertops. This was a sanctuary for the elite, a place where status wasn't just implied, it was the currency. Sitting in a secluded corner, far away from the buffet and the bar, was Elara Vance. At 34, Elara possessed the kind of stillness that made people nervous. She wore a charcoal cashmere wrap coat that looked simple to the untrained eye, but had cost more than a mid-sized sedan. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek, no-nonsense bun, and her eyes, dark and piercing, were fixed on the tablet in her lap. She wasn't drinking champagne. She wasn't making loud phone calls. She was reviewing the final compliance metrics for a hostile takeover of Vanguard Tech, a deal she had been orchestrating from the shadows for 6 months. Elara was the CEO of Orion Holdings, a private equity firm that didn't advertise. They didn't have billboards. They didn't have a flashy social media presence. They simply owned things. They owned the shipping lines that brought coffee to Seattle. They owned the fiber-optic cables running under the Atlantic. And, as of 3 hours ago, they had acquired a controlling interest in the banking conglomerate Sterling Ross. But nobody in the lounge knew that. To the people walking by, Elara was just a black woman sitting in a seat that looked too expensive for her. "Excuse me." The voice was nasally, clipped, and dripping with an unearned familiarity. Elara didn't look up immediately. She finished highlighting a paragraph on her screen, tapped "Save," and then slowly raised her eyes. Standing over her was a man who looked like he had been manufactured in a factory that built antagonists. He was tall, wearing a navy bespoke suit that was tailored a little too tight around the shoulders to emphasize a gym routine that likely consisted mostly of mirror selfies. His blonde hair was gelled into a stiff, immovable wave. He held a leather briefcase in one hand and a half-empty glass of scotch in the other. This was Julian Thorne, the heir to the Thorne logistics empire. A man whose reputation for boardroom temper tantrums was only matched by his reputation for failing upward. "Can I help you?" Elara asked, her voice calm, possessing a timbre that usually silenced boardrooms. Julian sneered, a small, ugly twisting of his lips. He gestured vaguely with his scotch glass at the empty seats around them. "You're in my spot." Elara looked around. The lounge was at perhaps 60% capacity. There were leather armchairs available by the window, near the bar, and by the fireplace. "I wasn't aware this chair had a reservation," she said, turning back to her tablet. "There are plenty of seats, sir." "It's not about the seats," Julian snapped, his voice rising just enough to turn a few heads nearby. "It's about the view. I always sit here before my flight to London. It's my ritual. And I need to focus. I have a billion-dollar merger closing in London tomorrow, and I don't need—" He waved a hand at her, up and down, a gesture so dismissive it felt physical. "Distractions." Elara felt the familiar heat rise in her chest, the ancient warning system that every person of color in a high-tax bracket knew intimately. But she suffocated the fire with ice. She was Elara Vance. She didn't argue with trust fund babies in airport lounges. "I'm working as well," Elara said, not moving an inch. "I suggest you find another spot. The view is quite similar from the chair 3 feet to your left." Julian's face flushed a blotchy red. He wasn't used to being told no, especially not by women, and definitely not by black women who he assumed were, at best, assistants burning through company miles. "Do you know who I am?" Julian hissed, leaning in, his breath reeking of expensive alcohol. "I am Julian Thorne, Thorne Logistics. I am a Diamond Key member with this airline. I practically paid for this wing of the airport." Elara looked him dead in the eye. "And I am trying to read a PDF, Mr. Thorne. Please go away." The silence that followed was heavy. Julian stared at her, his brain seemingly unable to process the rejection. He straightened his jacket, a cruel glint entering his eyes. "Fine," he said, his voice dropping to a sinister whisper. "Have it your way. But you're going to regret making this difficult. I promise you that." He turned on his heel and stormed toward the concierge desk, his loafers clicking aggressively on the marble floor. Elara watched him go, a small sigh escaping her lips. She knew that walk. That was the walk of a man who was about to call the manager. She looked down at her tablet, but the numbers were blurring. She had dealt with men like Julian her entire life. Usually, she destroyed them in the stock market. But today, she just wanted to get to London, sign the papers for the Vanguard deal, and sleep. She had no idea that Julian Thorne wasn't just going to complain about a seat in the lounge. He was about to initiate a chain of events that would end his career. 10 minutes later, the atmosphere in the lounge shifted. Elara sensed it before she saw it. The low hum of conversation stopped. She looked up to see Julian returning, a smug, predatory grin plastered across his face. Flanking him was a woman in the airline's official uniform, a red blazer and a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her name tag read, Brenda, Senior Shift Lead. Brenda walked with the stiff, self-righteous posture of a petty bureaucrat who finally had a chance to exercise a microscopic amount of power. "Ma'am," Brenda said, stopping in front of Elara's chair. She didn't use the polite, deferential tone reserved for first-class passengers. Her voice was sharp, accusatory. Elara powered down her tablet screen. "Yes." "Mr. Thorne has brought a concerning issue to my attention," Brenda said, clasping her hands in front of her. "He claims you've been aggressive and disruptive to the peace of the lounge. He also mentioned that you are refusing to vacate a seat that is reserved for our VIP Global Services members." Elara raised an eyebrow. "Aggressive? I told him I wouldn't move because I was working. And as for the seat, there is no reserved sign here. I scanned my ticket at the door just like everyone else." Julian laughed, a sharp, barking sound. "She's lying, Brenda. Look at her. Does she look like a Global Services member to you? She probably slipped in behind someone else, or she's using a fake employee pass." Elara stood up. She wasn't tall, but her presence was immense. "I am flying first class to Heathrow, seat 1A. I suggest you check your manifest before you make an accusation you can't take back." Brenda hesitated, but only for a second. She looked at Julian, the expensive suit, the gold watch, the Thorne name that was likely printed on the side of the cargo trucks she saw on the highway. Then she looked at Elara, the simple coat, the lack of jewelry, the dark skin. Brenda made her choice. "I don't need to check the manifest to know when someone is causing a disturbance," Brenda said, her voice turning steely. "Mr. Thorne is one of our most valued flyers. He contributes significantly to this airline. If he says you are being aggressive, I have to take that seriously." "So his word is worth more than the truth?" Ilara asked quietly. "It's about comfort," Brenda snapped, dropping the facade of politeness entirely. "Mr. Thorne is uncomfortable, and frankly, your attitude is making me uncomfortable. I'm going to have to ask you to gather your things." "And go where?" Ilara asked. "We have a perfectly good waiting area near Gate 42. "In the main terminal," Brenda said, pointing toward the exit doors. "You're kicking me out of the first-class lounge?" Ilara asked, her voice dangerously low. "I have a ticket." "Tickets can be revoked for behavioral issues," Julian interjected, stepping closer, looming over her. "Go on. Get out. Go sit with the rest of the economy class where you belong. You're ruining the ambiance." Ilara looked around. A few other passengers were watching. An older couple whispered behind their hands. A businessman in a grey suit looked away, pretending to check his phone. No one spoke up. No one came to her defense. It was the isolation that hurt the most. The silent complicity of the wealthy. Ilara reached into her bag. For a second, Brenda flinched, as if expecting a weapon. Ilara pulled out her boarding pass and her passport. "Check it," Ilara commanded, thrusting the documents toward Brenda. "Check the status." Brenda sighed, rolling her eyes, and took the boarding pass. She pulled out a handheld scanner from her belt and beeped the barcode. The machine chirped. A green light flashed. Brenda frowned. She looked at the screen. She tapped it a few times. "Well?" Ilara asked. It says first class," Brenda muttered, clearly annoyed that the machine hadn't validated her bias. "Seat 1A. "There," Ilara said, reaching for her pass. "I believe we're done here." But Julian wasn't done. He couldn't be done. His ego had been bruised, and now he had an audience. He stepped between Ilara and Brenda, his face twisting into a mask of pure malice. "It's a glitch," Julian insisted. "Or she bought it with stolen miles. Brenda, listen to me. I am flying to London to close a deal that involves Sterling Ross. Do you know Sterling Ross? It's the bank that finances your airline's fuel hedging. If I call my contact at the bank and tell them I was harassed in your lounge, and the staff did nothing, heads will roll." He leaned in closer to Brenda. "I want her off this flight. Not just the lounge. The flight. I don't feel safe flying with someone so volatile." The threat hung in the air. "I don't feel safe." The magic words. In the modern world of aviation, those 4 words were a nuclear weapon. They bypassed logic, bypassed rights, and bypassed truth. Brenda paled. She looked at Ilara. The validation on the scanner didn't matter anymore. The potential wrath of a VIP and his corporate connections outweighed one woman's ticket. "Ma'am," Brenda said, her voice shaking slightly but hardening with resolve, "Mr. Thorne has invoked a safety concern. I'm going to need you to come with me to the service desk. We need to reevaluate your clearance to fly today." "You have got to be kidding me," Ilara said, her hands balling into fists at her sides. "You are going to bump me because he threw a tantrum? I am going to remove you because you are a security risk," Brenda stated loudly, playing to the crowd now. "Please, don't make me call the Port Authority police. Grab your bag." Julian smirked, crossing his arms. He had won. He had wielded his privilege like a cudgel and beaten her into submission. "Bye-bye," he mouthed. Ilara stared at him. She looked at his smug face, his expensive watch, his arrogance. Then a shift occurred. The anger in Ilara's eyes cooled into something far more terrifying. Calculation. She remembered the email she had received that morning. The finalization of the Orion Holdings asset transfer. She remembered the specific portfolio that included Sterling Ross. Julian had mentioned Sterling Ross. He was closing a deal with them, a deal he needed. Ilara realized she didn't need to shout. She didn't need to fight Brenda. She didn't need the police. She slowly picked up her bag. She smoothed the front of her coat. "Fine," Ilara said softly. "I'll move. I'll go to the desk." "Smart choice," Julian laughed. "Don't miss the bus home." Ilara looked at him one last time. It was the look a lion gives a gazelle that doesn't yet know it's already dead. "Enjoy your flight, Julian," she said. "I really hope nothing interrupts it." She turned and followed Brenda out of the lounge, leaving the luxury behind. But as she walked into the harsh fluorescent lights of the main concourse, she wasn't reaching for a tissue to cry. She was reaching for her phone, and she was dialing the private, direct line of the chairman of the board of Sterling Ross. The game had just changed, and Julian Thorne had no idea he was playing against the house. The walk from the lounge to Gate 42 was a lesson in disciplined fury. Brenda marched ahead, her radio crackling with static, acting as if she were escorting a prisoner of war rather than a paying customer. Ilara followed 3 paces behind, her heels clicking a steady, ominous rhythm on the terrazzo floor. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. It was a message from her chief legal officer, Sarah. "Merger documents ready for signature in London. The Sterling Ross team is waiting for you at the Dorchester. Do not be late." Ilara didn't reply. She couldn't. Not yet. When they arrived at the podium for Gate 42, the boarding area was a zoo. A flight to Orlando had been cancelled nearby, and the spillover crowd was irritable and loud. Brenda cut through the line, unhooking the velvet rope with a snap, and marched behind the counter. She began typing furiously on the terminal, her acrylic nails clacking like hail on a tin roof. "Here is the situation," Brenda announced, not looking up. "I have spoken to the gate agent. Because of the incident in the lounge, we are flagging your profile. You are being allowed to fly, but strictly on a probationary basis." She looked up then, a smug satisfaction in her eyes. "However, Mr. Thorne has requested that he not be seated near you. He fears retaliation." Ilara stared at her. "Retaliation? I'm a CEO, not a gang member. I just want to get to my meeting." "Regardless," Brenda continued, printing out a slip of paper, "we are going to have to reseat you. Seat 1A is no longer available to you." Ilara looked at the ticket Brenda was holding. It wasn't economy. It was seat 4B. Still business class, but a significant downgrade from the private suite of 1A. It was an aisle seat, exposed, right next to the galley where the noise of rattling carts and flushing toilets would be constant. "This is unacceptable," Ilara said, her voice dropping an octave. "I paid full fare for first class. 1A is a suite. 4B is a glorified bus seat." "Take it or leave it," Brenda hissed, leaning over the counter. "The flight is oversold. If you don't take 4B, I'll bump you entirely. And trust me, with the report I'm about to file, no other airline will take you today either." Ilara looked at the boarding gate. Passengers were already lining up. She looked at the clock. If she missed this flight, the Sterling Ross merger would be delayed. If the merger was delayed, the market would get jittery. The stock price would wobble. She couldn't risk her company's reputation over a seat. She had to endure. For now. "Fine," Ilara said, snatching the boarding pass from Brenda's hand. "Give me the ticket." Brenda smiled, a victory lap in facial form. "Smart girl. Now wait here. We board VIPs first. Mr. Thorne needs to board before you." Ilara stood by the window, watching the rain streak the glass. 5 minutes later, Julian Thorne arrived. He didn't walk, he strutted. He had freshened up in the lounge. His hair was re-gelled, and he was laughing loudly into his cell phone. "Yeah, total nightmare, mate." Some diversity hire tried to hijack the lounge. But don't worry, I put her in her place. The staff loves me here. I'm basically running the airline." He caught Ilara's eye as he approached the gate. He didn't look away. He winked, a slow, deliberate, mocking wink. "Afternoon," Julian chirped as he handed his pass to the gate agent. He looked back at Ilara. "Don't worry, 4B isn't that bad. I hear the legroom is adequate. If you're short." He laughed at his own joke and breezed down the jet bridge. Ilara felt a vein throb in her temple. She took a deep breath, counting backward from 10. 10. 9. 8. Destroy him. 6. 5. "Zone 1, the agent announced. Ilara stepped forward, scanned her new, downgraded ticket, and walked down the jet bridge. The air grew colder as she neared the plane. She stepped onto the aircraft, the smell of recycled air and sanitizer hitting her. She turned left into the business cabin. She passed the first-class suites. The curtains were drawn, but she could hear Julian settling in. "Champagne, Mr. Thorne?" A flight attendant cooed. "Make it a double, darling. I have a victory to celebrate." Julian's voice drifted out. Ilara gritted her teeth and kept walking. She found seat 4B. It was exactly as she feared, right next to the lavatory and the galley. People were bumping her shoulder with their carry-ons as they shuffled past to economy. She sat down, placing her bag under the seat in front of her. She buckled her seatbelt. She closed her eyes. "Just get to London," she told herself. "Just get to London, sign the deal, and then buy this airline just to fire Brenda." But the universe, it seemed, wasn't done testing Ilara Vance. The boarding process was agonizingly slow. Every passenger who walked past Ilara seemed to bump her elbow or knock her knee. But finally, the heavy cabin doors were closed. The fasten seatbelt sign chimed. Ilara exhaled. She was on the plane. They were moving. Then the plane stopped. They hadn't even pushed back from the gate yet. The engines whined down. A sudden, heavy silence fell over the cabin. Ilara opened her eyes. The purser, a tall woman with a severe bob cut, named Joyce, was walking down the aisle. She wasn't looking at the passengers. She was looking directly at Ilara. Joyce stopped at row 4. "Miss Vance?" Joyce asked, her voice loud enough for the surrounding rows to hear. "Yes," Ilara said, tensing up. "I need you to grab your things," Joyce said. "There's been a complication." "What complication?" Ilara asked. "The doors are closed." "Mr. Thorne," Joyce said, lowering her voice slightly, but not enough. "Mr. Thorne in seat 1A has informed the captain that he is uncomfortable with the current seating arrangement. He claims that your presence in the business cabin is causing him emotional distress due to the earlier altercation." Ilara laughed. It was a cold, dry sound. "Emotional distress? He's drinking champagne in a private suite. I'm back here by the toilets. How does he even know I'm here?" "He checked the manifest," Joyce said tightly. "Look, I don't make the rules. The captain wants to keep the peace. We have a non-rev employee sitting in economy, seat 34E, a middle seat. We need you to swap with him." The cabin went silent. The businessman in 4A looked at Ilara with pity. "You want me to move to the back of the plane?" Ilara asked slowly. "I paid $12,000 for a first-class ticket. You already downgraded me to business. Now you want to put me in a middle seat in economy?" "We will refund the difference in miles," Joyce said, her patience thinning. "But we need to push back. Mr. Thorne is a Diamond Key member. We cannot fly if a passenger feels unsafe." "Unsafe?" Ilara stood up. The seatbelt sign was on, but she didn't care. "He is bullying me, and you are enabling him." "Sit down, ma'am," Joyce snapped, "or I will have the marshals escort you off." "Let them come," Ilara's voice rang out, clear and authoritative. I want everyone on this plane to see this. I am being moved because a white man in first class decided he didn't like my face. That is enough! Suddenly, the curtain to first class whipped open. Julian Thorne stood there. He had taken off his jacket. He looked flushed, angry, and incredibly arrogant. "Will you just go?" Julian shouted, pointing a finger at her. "God, you people are always so loud. Just take the 3 miles and sit in the back. You're delaying my merger." "Your merger?" Elara repeated. The words hung in the air. She looked at Julian. Then she looked at the flight attendant. "You really want to play this game?" Elara asked softly. "Move." "Now," Julian sneered. Elara didn't move toward economy. Instead, she reached into her purse. "Ma'am, put the phone away," Joyce yelled. "You cannot record this." "I'm not recording," Elara said calmly. She unlocked her screen. Her thumb hovered over the contacts list. She found the name she had saved years ago, a number given to her at a gala in Davos, a private number. Marcus Sterling, chairman, Sterling Ross Banking Group. "I'm making a call," Elara said. "You can't make calls. The doors are closed." Julian laughed. "Who are you going to call? Your mum? The NAACP?" Elara hit dial. She put the phone to her ear. Because the plane was still at the gate, the signal was strong. It rang once, twice. "Elara?" A deep, gravelly voice answered. It was the voice of a man who moved mountains with a whisper. Marcus Sterling. "Marcus," Elara said, her voice steady, cutting through the tension in the cabin. "I apologize for the interruption. I know it's late in London." Julian's face faltered. The name Marcus didn't register yet. "Elara, my dear," Marcus sounded concerned. "Is everything all right? We are expecting you for the signing in 6 hours. The board is assembled." "I'm afraid I'm going to be delayed, Marcus," Elara said, staring dead into Julian's eyes. "I am currently being removed from my seat on the flight to Heathrow. It seems a passenger named Julian Thorne finds my presence distressing." On the other end of the line, there was a pause, a silence so heavy it felt like the air pressure dropped. "Julian Thorne?" Marcus asked. His voice had lost all warmth. "The boy from Thorne Logistics?" "The same," Elara said. "He says he's flying to London to close a merger with you, with Sterling Ross." "He is," Marcus said. "A $940 million liquidity injection. We are financing their expansion." "Well," Elara said, watching the color drain from Julian's face as he finally recognized the name she was saying. "I think you should know, Marcus, that Orion Holdings is currently exercising its majority shareholder rights within your bank." Julian froze. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "I'm enacting a Clause 4 freeze," Elara said, her voice like a guillotine blade. "As the incoming majority owner of Sterling Ross, I am formally vetoing the Thorne Logistics merger, effective immediately." "Elara," Marcus started, but he knew better than to argue with her when she used that tone. "If you kill the deal, Thorne Logistics goes into default by Monday." "I know," Elara said coldly. "Kill it. Free the capital. And Marcus?" "Yes." "Put his credit lines on administrative hold. All of them, personal and corporate. I want his cards to decline before this plane wheels up." "Done," Marcus said. "I'll call the risk department now." Elara hung up. The silence in the cabin was absolute. Even the crying baby in row 12 had stopped. Elara slowly lowered the phone. She looked at Joyce, who looked like she might faint. Then she looked at Julian. Julian was trembling. He looked at his phone. He tapped the banking app. He refreshed the screen. His face turned a sickly shade of grey. "You," Julian stammered. "You can't. Who are you?" "I told you in the lounge," Elara said, sitting back down in seat 4B and crossing her legs. "I'm Elara Vance, CEO of Orion Holdings, the company that bought the bank you were begging for money." She looked up at Joyce. "Now," Elara said pleasantly, "unless you want me to call the CEO of this airline, who I also play golf with, and explain why his staff is harassing his biggest investor, I suggest you get this plane in the air. I'm comfortable right here in 4B. Julian stared at his phone screen. The notification popped up. Alert. Account suspended. Contact bank. He looked up at Elara, terror in his eyes. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no! That deal saves my company. You can't do this." "I just did," Elara said. She put her headphones on. "Excuse me, Mr. Thorne. I have a view to enjoy, even if it is just the galley." The seatbelt sign pinged off as the aircraft leveled out at 35,000 feet over the Atlantic. The cabin was dim. The hum of the engines, a steady drone that usually lulled passengers to sleep. But in the business class cabin of Flight 19, there was no sleep. There was only the thick, suffocating tension of a cage match. Elara Vance, seated in 4B, was the picture of tranquility. She had retrieved her laptop, a sleek, customized device with military-grade encryption, and was calmly reviewing the live schematic of Thorne Logistics' debt structure. She ordered a sparkling water with a twist of lime. She thanked the flight attendant, a young woman named Sarah who was notably kinder than Joyce or Brenda, with a warm smile. 3 rows ahead, in the plush isolation of Suite 1A, Julian Thorne was unraveling. He had spent the first 20 minutes of the flight staring at the "account suspended" notification on his phone. Denial was a powerful drug, and Julian was overdosing on it. "It's a glitch," he told himself. "A banking error. It has to be. Nobody suspends a billionaire heir's accounts on a Sunday." He needed Wi-Fi. He needed to call his father. He needed to fix this before they landed in London. He pressed the call button. Joyce, the purser, appeared instantly, her face a mask of strained politeness. She was nervous. She had seen Elara make the call. She had seen Julian's face fall. She knew, deep down, that the power dynamic had shifted, but she was committed to her VIP. "Mr. Thorne, can I get you anything?" Joyce whispered. "The Wi-Fi," Julian hissed, his hands shaking as he held his phone. "I need the high-speed streaming package. The portal isn't loading." "You can purchase it through the entertainment screen, sir," Joyce said. "It's $30. "I know how to purchase it," Julian snapped. "Just bring me another drink, a double scotch, and make the Wi-Fi work." Julian stabbed his finger at the screen. He selected the ultimate business package. He swiped his black card, the card that had never, in his entire life, been declined. "Processing." Julian tapped his foot. Come on. Transaction declined. Julian stared at the screen. A cold sweat broke out on his forehead. He tried again. "Transaction declined. Please contact issuer." "Damn it," Julian shouted, slamming his hand against the armrest. A few passengers jumped. Elara didn't look up from her spreadsheet. He pulled out another card. His corporate Amex. Declined. He pulled out his personal Visa. Declined. "Mr. Thorne?" Joyce was back with the scotch. "Is there a problem?" "Your machine is broken," Julian spat, grabbing the glass. "My cards are fine. It's your cheap system. Just comp me the Wi-Fi. I'm a Diamond member. Do it." Joyce hesitated. "Sir, I can't comp the paid Wi-Fi. The system locks me out. I need a valid payment method." "I am Julian Thorne," he roared, standing up in the small suite. "I am good for $30. Turn the internet on." "Sir, please lower your voice," Joyce pleaded, looking around frantically. From back in seat 4B, Elara's voice floated through the cabin, calm, clear, and devastating. "He can't pay, Joyce," Elara said, finally looking up. His credit lines have been frozen by the issuer. Risk management protocols. Usually happens when a company is flagged for imminent insolvency. Julian whipped around, his face purple. You shut up. You don't know anything. I am going to sue you for slander. I am going to buy your little investment firm and burn it to the ground. Ilara smiled. It was a terrifying smile. You can't even buy Wi-Fi, Julian. How are you going to buy my firm? She turned to the flight attendant standing near her. Sarah, isn't it? Yes, ma'am? Sarah asked. I'd like to purchase Wi-Fi for Mr. Thorne, Ilara said, holding out her card. The platinum card made of heavy metal. And for everyone else in business class, put it on my tab. You want to pay for him? Sarah asked, confused. Oh, yes, Ilara said. He needs to see the news. I wouldn't want him to miss the show. Sarah took the card. The transaction cleared instantly. Ladies and gentlemen, Sarah announced over the PA system. Complimentary high-speed Wi-Fi has been provided for the duration of the flight, courtesy of Miss Vance, in seat 4B. A ripple of thank yous went through the cabin. Julian stood there, humiliated, stripped of his power, holding a drink he couldn't pay for. He sat down and connected to the network. His phone flooded with notifications. CNN business. Sterling Ross pulls plug on Thorne Logistics merger. Bloomberg. Thorne Logistics stock plummets 40% in after-hours trading. The Financial Times. Insider trading probe launched against Julian Thorne following airport incident. Julian felt the bile rise in his throat. He opened his email. There were 50 messages from his father, Richard Thorne. The subject line screamed at him, "Where are you? Answer the phone. The bank called the loans. It's over." Julian tapped the most recent email. It was just one line. They know about the offshore accounts, Julian. The freeze exposed the Cayman transfers. The police are waiting at Heathrow. Julian dropped the phone. It clattered onto the floor of the suite. He looked out the window at the endless black ocean. He was trapped in a metal tube, hurtling at 500 miles per hour toward his own destruction. He looked back at seat 4B. Ilara was wearing an eye mask now. She was sleeping. She was sleeping while his life burned down. For the next 6 hours, Julian didn't drink the scotch. He sat in the dark, shaking, refreshing the stock ticker as his inheritance evaporated, dollar by dollar. Every drop in the graph was a punch to the gut, and every time he looked back, the black woman he had called a security risk was resting peacefully, guarded by the very silence he had tried to weaponize against her. The landing into Heathrow was rough. The wind and rain battered the fuselage, mirroring the turbulence inside Julian's mind. When the wheels slammed onto the tarmac, Julian flinched. To him, it sounded like a gavel coming down. The plane taxied to the gate. The fasten seatbelt sign turned off. Instantly, Julian was up. He grabbed his briefcase. He needed to run. If he could get to the private terminal, maybe he could get a charter to Dubai. Maybe he could outrun the extradition treaties. He pushed past the curtain, shoving a slow-moving elderly man out of the way. "Out of my way!" Julian shouted. "I have to get off!" "Sir, please wait for the bridge to connect," Joyce yelled. But Julian was already at the door, vibrating with panic. Ilara took her time. She gathered her coat. She checked her phone. A text from Marcus. Paperwork signed. Police briefed. Good luck. The cabin door opened. Usually, the first-class passengers were greeted by a smiling agent. Today, they were greeted by 3 officers of the Metropolitan Police and 2 agents from the Serious Fraud Office. Julian stopped dead in the jetway. He saw the uniforms. His first instinct, honed by years of privilege, was to deflect. He pointed back into the cabin. "There she is!" Julian shouted, pointing a trembling finger at Ilara, who was just stepping off the plane behind him. "That's her! "Elara Vance! She threatened me! She hacked my bank accounts! Arrest her!" The lead officer, a tall man with a stern face and a badge that read Inspector Graves, didn't even look at Elara. He kept his eyes locked on Julian. "Julian Edward Thorne?" Graves asked. "Yes, that's me, the victim," Julian stammered. "She's the one you want. She's a cyber-terrorist." Inspector Graves stepped forward. He pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt. The metal clicked ominously. "Julian Thorne, I am arresting you on suspicion of wire fraud, embezzlement of corporate funds, and insider trading," Graves said, his voice booming in the enclosed space. "You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defense if you do not mention, when questioned, something which you later rely on in court." Julian's eyes bulged. "What? No, you have the wrong person. My father is Richard Thorne. I have a meeting with Sterling Ross." "Sterling Ross provided the evidence for the warrant, sir," Graves said, spinning Julian around and snapping the cuffs onto his wrists. "They flagged a series of illegal transfers you attempted to make whilst on the aircraft." The passengers from the flight were filing out now. They stopped, watching the spectacle. Phones were out. The man Julian had shoved recorded everything. Julian struggled, his expensive suit twisting. "This is a mistake. Brenda, Joyce, tell them." He looked for his allies, but Brenda and Joyce were standing by the cockpit door, pale and silent. They knew better than to interfere with the Met Police. They were already calculating how to save their own jobs, unaware that the termination emails had already been drafted. Elara walked past the commotion. She didn't stop. She didn't gloat. She simply walked with the steady, rhythmic click of her heels. As she passed Julian, who was being pressed against the wall of the jetway by the officers, he looked up at her. His eyes were wild, filled with tears and confusion. "Why?" he croaked. "Why did you do this? It was just a seat." Elara stopped. She turned slowly. The entire jetway went silent. "It was never just a seat, Julian," she said, her voice low, but carrying the weight of a judge's sentence. "It was the assumption that you could take it. You thought your name was a shield. You forgot that in my world, names are just assets." "And yours?" She looked him up and down, from his messy hair to his handcuffed wrists. "Yours is now a liability." She turned to Inspector Graves. "Officer, if you need a statement regarding his behavior on the flight, the aggression, the threats, my legal team will be in touch. I have several witnesses." "Thank you, Ms. Vance." Graves nodded respectfully. "We have enough to hold him, but we'll be in contact." "Good." Elara adjusted her bag. She walked down the long corridor toward immigration, leaving Julian Thorne screaming impotently as he was dragged away in front of the very people he had deemed economy class. She reached the end of the jetway and stepped into the terminal. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number. "Hi, Dad," she said, her voice softening for the first time that day. "Elara." Her father's voice came from across the ocean, warm and familiar. "You land okay? How was the flight?" "It was eventful," Elara said, watching the rain fall on the London tarmac. "But I think I made a good investment." "Oh? Did you buy that bank?" "I did," Elara said, smiling, "and I took out the trash." The Dorchester Hotel in London is known for its timeless elegance, a place where history is written in hushed tones over afternoon tea. But in the private Gold Room conference suite on the second floor, history wasn't being written. An empire was being dismantled. Elara Vance sat at the head of the long mahogany table. She had changed out of her travel clothes into a sharp, white blazer that made her look like a modern angel of retribution. To her right sat Marcus Sterling, checking a stack of documents with a red pen. Opposite them sat Richard Thorne. The patriarch of the Thorne logistics dynasty looked nothing like the photos in Forbes. The man who had once terrified unions and crushed competitors now looked frail. His skin was sallow, his eyes rimmed with red. He hadn't slept since the video of his son screaming in handcuffs hit the internet. The stock price of Thorn Logistics had free-fallen 68% in 24 hours. The room was deadly silent, save for the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. "The terms are draconian," Richard said, his voice trembling as he pushed the contract back across the table. "Elara, Ms. Vance, you are offering 30 cents on the dollar. This company has been in my family for 50 years. You're asking me to sell it for scrap." Elara didn't blink. She reached for her porcelain teacup and took a slow sip. "I am not asking, Richard," she said softly. "I am informing." She set the cup down. "Let's look at the alternative. The bank, my bank, holds $940 million of your debt that was contingent on the merger that Julian blew up. Since the merger is dead, the debt is callable immediately. Can you write a check for $940 million today?" Richard looked down at his hands. "You know I can't. The liquidity is tied up in the fleet." "Exactly," Elara said. "So you default. If you default, I seize the assets anyway. The trucks, the planes, the warehouses. I break it up, sell the pieces, and leave you with nothing. Not even a pension." She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. "This deal? This draconian deal. It keeps the company intact. It saves the jobs of your 4,000 employees. It ensures the drivers who have worked for you for decades don't lose their homes. I will absorb the debt, inject the capital, and turn the company around." "But the name," Richard whispered. "Clause 14. Elara glanced at the document. Clause 14. Rebranding strategy. "Yes," Elara said. "The name Thorn Logistics is toxic. No one wants to ship their goods with a company whose face is a man screaming racial slurs at a CEO. The name goes." "And what will it be called?" Richard asked, defeated. Elara smiled. "Vance Global." Richard flinched. The final insult. His family legacy wiped out and replaced by the woman his son had tried to humiliate. "And Julian?" Richard asked, a father's desperation breaking through the businessman's facade. "What happens to my son?" Marcus Sterling looked up from his papers. "The Serious Fraud Office is pressing charges, Richard. The insider trading evidence is irrefutable. He tried to move corporate funds to a personal offshore account while connected to the flight Wi-Fi. We have the IP logs. He's looking at 5 to 10 years. Richard put his head in his hands. A sob escaped him. Elara felt a flicker of pity, but she extinguished it quickly. Richard had raised Julian. He had bailed him out of every mistake, paid off every victim, and taught him that he was untouchable. This wasn't just Julian's failure, it was Richard's too. "Sign the papers, Richard," Elara said firmly. "Do it for the employees. Do it so you have something left to pay for Julian's lawyers." Richard Thorne picked up the heavy fountain pen. His hand shook so violently he could barely hold it. He looked at the contract, the death certificate of his legacy. He signed. Richard Thorne, CEO. It was done. Elara stood up. She didn't offer a handshake. It wasn't that kind of deal. "Marcus will handle the transition," Elara said. "I expect your office to be cleared out by Monday." She walked to the door, her heels sinking into the plush carpet. As she reached the handle, her phone buzzed. She pulled it out. It was an email from the airline's corporate headquarters. Subject: Update regarding Flight 1. Personnel, dear Ms. Vance. We hope this message finds you well. We wanted to personally inform you that following our internal investigation into the events of Flight 109, 1. Brenda Miller, Senior Shift Lead, has been terminated effective immediately for gross misconduct and discriminatory profiling. 2. Joyce Halloway, Purser, has been terminated for failure to de-escalate and complicity in passenger harassment. 3. The airline is donating $50,000 to the NLSACP Legal Defense Fund in your name. We hope you will consider flying with us again." Ilara smirked. She typed a quick reply. "I'll think about it, but next time I'm bringing my own plane." She stepped out of the conference room and into the lobby of the Dorchester. The air was crisp and cool. The London fog had lifted. A chaotic scene awaited her outside. The press had found out where the meeting was. As the doorman held the glass doors open, flashbulbs exploded like fireworks. "Miss Vance! Miss Vance! Is it true you bought the company? Did you bankrupt the Thorne family? What do you have to say to Julian?" Ilara stopped on the steps. She put on her sunglasses, shielding her eyes from the glare. She looked at the reporters, then at the camera lens of a news crew broadcasting live. "I have one thing to say," Ilara said, her voice carrying over the noise. The crowd quieted down. "Respect," Ilara said, "is not a currency you can print. It is something you earn. And if you think you can buy it with a platinum credit card or a family name, you might just find yourself paying a price you can't afford." She signaled for her car. A sleek, black Rolls-Royce pulled up, part of the fleet she now owned. The driver opened the door. "Where to, boss?" Ilara Vance, the girl who had been told she didn't look like she belonged in first class, looked back at the hotel one last time. "To the airport," she said. "I have a business to run." She slid into the back seat, the door closing with a solid, expensive thud. The car pulled away, leaving the chaos behind, driving smoothly toward a horizon that she now controlled completely. Karma hadn't just hit back. It had settled the account, closed the ledger, and handed Ilara the keys to the kingdom. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the story of the $9 or $40 million mistake. Julian Thorne thought he was the king of the world because of who his father was, but he learned the hard way that in the boardroom and in life, character is the only currency that matters. He lost his freedom, his family's legacy, and his dignity, all because he couldn't stand the sight of a powerful black woman sitting in a seat she earned. Ilara Vance didn't just get revenge, she got justice. She saved thousands of jobs, dismantled a toxic empire, and proved that silence is often the loudest scream. Now I have to ask you, what would you have done if you were in Ilara's shoes? Would you have accepted the apology and the miles, or would you have gone nuclear and bought the bank just to teach him a lesson? Personally, I think she let him off easy. If you enjoyed this saga of high-flying drama and instant karma, please do me a huge favor. Smash that like button until it turns blue. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder to be humble, and subscribe with notifications on so you never miss a story. We drop new videos every week about people getting exactly what they deserve. Thanks for watching, fly safe, and remember, be nice to the person in 4B. They might just own the plane.